Hello, my friends. Mkwann here. Gregorian calendar date, October 22nd, Gregorian calendar year, 2024. And the following video is a continuation of the videos I put out about 2 weeks ago. I made 3 videos describing the seeming correlation between the River and Stars ceremony, which I had done or concluded in Asheville, North Carolina, and the seeming correspondence between Hurricane Helene. And I mean, I guess I could use the word controversial. That was a little bit of a controversial video because I was tiptoeing around the concept of how these two events, the River and Stars ceremonies, the one that concluded in Asheville, and the Helene hurricane, were connected. And I didn't exactly, because I don't necessarily think this is the case, I wasn't exactly implying a causality relationship, but I was saying there's something there. There are too many data points that overlap and are corresponding that it at least gave room for pause, and then just kind of opened up from there into what I thought were some thought-provoking videos and information. So where I'm going to go to now is Hurricane Milton, the hurricane that formed a handful of days after I released those videos. So Hurricane Milton wasn't even on the radar, pardon the pun, or, applaud the pun. Hurricane Milton wasn't on the radar when those videos were being made. And now it gets even deeper and more strange. So with that being said, let me just jump right into this. So this is a screenshot from the YouTube studio setting, where if you have a YouTube channel, they show you all the different videos that you've ever put up, and they give you a dashboard of that. And I want to begin by talking about this video right here called Burial Mounds, Day of the Dead, and a Chance Meeting. I believe that's what the full title is. And you can see this video was published November 2nd, 2023. So almost a year ago to the day. And I'm going to begin this video, or this portion of the video, by replaying the first 10 minutes of this video here. Greetings, my friends. Mkwann here. Gregorian calendar date, November the 2nd, 2023. Location, St. Petersburg, Florida. And I got a good story for you. So the story is going to have multiple levels. So I'm going to begin with the earliest level, which has to do with me and my childhood. So probably up until the age of 10 or 11. So this is probably bringing me up to bringing us in the story up to the late 70s, early 80s. I had wooden blocks that I would play with. Not like toddler blocks, but like big blocks. Like I can remember there was a large cardboard box which they were kept in, and the big ones were probably like 3 feet long. They're probably made from 2x4s, which were cut down and turned into children's blocks. And I used them in a lot of my play, my independent play when I was growing up, like making racetracks and stuff like that. And I have these memories pretty clearly. And on these blocks, there was like for lack of a better word, graffiti. They were not my blocks originally. I had inherited them, and they had like drawings of faces on them. And I remember Bruce the Moose was written on it, and that also is included in my memory of my childhood, of my history. And those blocks were originally owned by a next door neighbor of my family. So I lived in a house in Columbia, Maryland from my age, like I was born into, and I lived there till like age 4, and then my parents moved to Richmond, Virginia, and then they moved back to Columbia. But that first house from 0 to 4, there was a next door neighbor. And obviously, we didn't live like in a farm. We lived in a suburb of Columbia. I've talked about Columbia a lot, and our next door neighbor. And the next door neighbor, my parents were close with the family, and they had a son who was, from what I understand, like an outstanding young man, like literally an Eagle Scout. Like, we lived next door to an Eagle Scout, and they were his blocks when he was a child. And even more so, this young man would babysit occasionally me and my sister. And he died prematurely. In a car accident. He died when he was in high school. And I am, as an adult, like I know that story. I know the story of this young man who had babysat me and my sister, and he was at least close enough to my family that he was our babysitter at times, and he died prematurely. And I've often wondered, I was like, and those were his blocks, and that I played with as a child, and I had some type of connection to those blocks and to him through those blocks. So I've been aware of this just in the background of my mind, and just curious, what exactly is that? Like, what was that influence? Did that influence me as a child, or as a child, that impact, did that influence me becoming an adult? Those sort of questions, and I wouldn't say that I put any deep time into that analysis, but I'm aware of, my inner world and my thoughts. So I know that's been there. All right. So that's the background of the story. So now we're going to go to level 2. So this was just yesterday, Christy and I go to what is our favorite beach in the St. Petersburg area, which is, it's a public park, and it's called Fort DeSoto Park. So Fort DeSoto Park, and we could see Fort DeSoto Park is operated by the county on 5 offshore keys or islands. They're connected by either a bridge or causeway. And what's really nice about this beach is, like, a lot of the beaches here are like your typical beaches. They are commercial, and there are high-rise buildings and so forth all around. And what's nice about Fort DeSoto is that it's a park. And so these here are the different islands it's talking about, and Fort DeSoto is right here at this point, and it's called Fort DeSoto because at one point it was a military fort. The Spanish-American Wars, the history named after DeSoto, all this sort of stuff, and that I'm not really going to get into. A lot of that could be questioned, I believe. I don't know his name. His Instagram account is Old World Florida, but he recasts a lot of the telling of the Floridian history. And I'm pretty certain that this park would be part of it. But anyway, so we're here yesterday. This is what it looks like. This is where the fort was. This is the beach. You could see that it's a park. There are no high rises. Really, really nice place to go. We love going there. Like, this is our favorite place in the area. You could see what the beach looks like. And we're there yesterday. And there is at this park, like right here there's like a gift shop and a concession stand. This here is the snack bar inside Fort DeSoto Park. And we went in and we got a cone of ice cream. I wanted to get an ice cream cone. And I see that the ice cream is Hershey's ice cream. And for whatever reason, I offer to the guy who's serving the ice cream, old timer. Turns out he was 62 years old. And I'm like, hey, me and Christy, we're from Hershey. We're not exactly from Hershey, but Hershey is right next to Lancaster. And I just threw that out there. And the guy responds, he's like, oh, well, that's kind of close to where I used to live. And he said that he lived in Baltimore, which then I went and added a little bit more clarification. I was like, well, I didn't grow up in Baltimore, or I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, which is outside of Baltimore. And he's like, I know Columbia, Maryland. In fact, my aunt, she was one of the early adopters, one of the first people who lived in Columbia when Columbia first became a thing in the late 60s, early 70s, as were my parents. My parents were as well. I'm listening to him say that. And then he says, she lived on Farewell Road. Now, Farewell Road is the road which I grew up on. Columbia, yes, it was in the early days of Columbia in the 70s, in the early 70s and late 60s. But there were lots and lots of roads. It wasn't like there was one road. So for this guy to say that his aunt lived on Farewell Road, I only remember a handful of roads in Columbia. There are hundreds of them. And I'm like, I lived on Farewell Road. And he's like, my aunt's name was Betty Jones. In fact, my cousin, this is what he was saying. He said, my cousin, my aunt's son, he died. He died when he was in high school. He died in a car accident, and it was horrible. And his name was Bruce Jones. This was my neighbor. This was literally my next door neighbor, the person who I was just telling you about of the blocks, Bruce Jones, Bruce the Moose. And this man who I'm talking to, who was, as this is happening, he's giving us sample after sample of all of these different ice cream flavors. And there is this connection. There's this connection, as I said, it wasn't an overarching theme or mystery in my life. Who is this young man who died prematurely, who was once my babysitter, who now I have as blocks? Who is, that wasn't an overarching question in my life, but I've certainly had that. And now there's at least some degree of resolution. There's some degree of connection. So as this happens, I'm kind of taken aback by the synchronicity or the coincidence of this all. And this is my sister. This is just a screenshot of the text of me telling her what happened. So I'm at the Fort DeSoto ice cream stand. This is me writing to my sister Jamie. She's in England right now. That's why I'm house sitting for her. And somehow it was mentioned that I lived in Columbia, and the concession stand guy says his aunt lived on Farewell Road in the early 70s, and his aunt lived there, and her name was Betty Jones, and then her 17-year-old cousin, her son, died in an auto accident. So I'm telling that story to my sister, and I knew this was the owner of the blocks. What I did not realize until my sister clarified it was they were literally our next door neighbors. So this is my sister's saying yes, they were neighbors and they used to babysit us. So all of that happened yesterday. Okay. Let us return back to the present moment as marked Gregorian wise, October 22nd, 2024. This video right here, came out in November 2nd, 2023. All right. So how do I want to go about this? In this video, in this Burial Mounds Day of the Dead and a Chance Meeting, I I continue on in that story, and I link into the story about the timeliness of hearing about my childhood and this dead babysitter, that it happened on the Day of the Dead, on Samhain, on Halloween, on when the veil is said to be the thinnest. And then I go even deeper and I begin to talk about the St. Petersburg and Tampa area, which is known for its high concentration of mound sites and the correlation between mounds and ancestors, and therefore the other side, if you will, which Samhain and Day of the Dead were all about. Like, that was kind of where I went with that video. I thought it was a real interesting. I thought it was a real interesting story. So you could see very few people watched it, but you know, it might be interesting to rewatch it again now. So where I want to go with this is, this entire video began with this chance meeting, and that entire chance meeting was hinged upon Hershey's ice cream and Hershey, Pennsylvania. Had I not brought up into the conversation the correlation which I had to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and therefore Hershey's ice cream, well, then none of that would have, that discovery, the discovery of the concession stand guy being cousins with my former dead babysitter, none of that would have happened. So Hershey is the connection, and we're going to go down a couple layers on that right now. We're just kind of like build up around it. You know, this is what we're doing here, is exploration into the nature of reality, right? So I didn't even realize this until making the video that you're watching right now. I always just assumed that Hershey's ice cream and Hershey, the chocolate company, were the same organization, but they're not. But they're strangely connected. So what I mean by that is, Hershey's ice cream was founded in 1894 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Hershey, the chocolate company, was founded in 1894, also in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. But they're two different companies. We see the ice cream company, you know, it's got 450 employees. Like, that's a decent sized company, I would suppose, 450 employees. But in comparison to the international monstrosity of Hershey, of the Hershey company, which has 16,000 employees, like, this is a really small company, I suppose. We can see right here that now Hershey's ice cream is headquartered in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and currently we see that the headquarters here for the Hershey company is in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And just to make this clear to everyone who doesn't know their Pennsylvania geography, this is Hershey, this is Harrisburg. Probably like 10 miles apart, if even that far apart. But we see that this is still in the same part of the world. And right here, we see this is Elizabethtown. So Elizabethtown is just south of Hershey right here. And the reason why that's important, you know, here's the epicenter of the Susquehanna mystery. And this is High Point Scenic Vista. This is the exact 40th parallel at the Susquehanna River. And I highlight these three colleges that are in a T-square around it. And this one right here is Elizabethtown College in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. That's right here. So we could see that this area is, you know, in space, in location, in material reality, we're seeing it's the same location. And the videos which I made about Hurricane Helene, I linked into those videos that Hurricane Helene was in harmonic resonance with an 1894 hurricane, which was called or 1896 hurricane called the Cedar Keys hurricane. Go watch the second video in that series if you're curious for more details. But what I linked in that second video was how the 1896 Cedar Keys hurricane is in resonance with Hurricane Helene. And then I showed that this 1896 Cedar Keys hurricane was even connected to the 40th parallel and the Susquehanna River, because the hurricane destroyed this Columbia-Wrightsville bridge over the Susquehanna River, which is located right here. This is where the Columbia-Wrightsville bridge was. This is High Point Scenic Vista, which is the epicenter. I mean, right here is the line for that Wrightsville bridge. And we see, or at least I brought into the conversation, like, all of this is tightly wound together, these places and these times and these events. And just kind of for fun, and what I mean by fun is I'm not necessarily saying this is how the world works, but I'm also saying maybe this is how the world works, because I just don't know. But in the TV show, Loki, it mentions Wrightsville, Pennsylvania. It mentions where this Wrightsville bridge is. And in Loki, it specifically mentions Wrightsville in the context of a mysterious organization that manages timelines. Now, again, I don't know if there's like parallel timelines that are being manipulated all the time. I'm certainly open to that idea. But I can't say for certain, I'm within the timeline. It's hard to see, what this reality actually is when we're experiencing it from within it. And that's just an honest description of, the human experience. But if there is, if this is a more accurate description, a more accurate description of the nature of reality, of timeline manipulations and all these different things, I'm certainly going to go and suggest that Hershey Ice Cream Company, the Hershey Creamery Company, and the Hershey Company, the chocolate company, which was founded in the same space and time, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 1894. So I guess that would be 2 years before the 1896 hurricane hit. So let me go back to this map. This is where that bridge is. This is Lancaster City, where the Hershey companies began. Do these represent two different timelines? Like the creation of a quote-unquote sugar company that was found in the same place? I don't know. But if that is the way the world works, this certainly would be a really big clue. So anyway, let's go back. We're going to go deep with this, but let's return to why we're having this conversation right now. The conversation right now is this relationship which is being discovered or being explored, relating like the Susquehanna mystery and yours truly here and Florida and hurricanes and what's going on right now. So here are the videos. These were the videos that I made about Helene, October 7th or October 1st, October 4th, and October 7th is when they came out. So let's go look at Hurricane Milton. Hurricane Milton formed on October 5th. So right around here, like right when these videos were being put out. In fact, the day after the 128 hertz frequency, where I actually go into the correspondence between Helene and the Susquehanna River at the 40th parallel, that's when Hurricane Milton comes into existence. And the reason why I'm where I'm going to go with this video is we're talking about these two companies, small Hershey's ice cream and then the gigantic Hershey company. And the gigantic Hershey company was founded by Milton Hershey, right? Hurricane Milton. So, that's where we're beginning. Like, that's the level of solidness of what we're working with. And so to a mainstream thinker, like, yeah, I get it. Like, that's a stretch. But all of this is a stretch. This whole thing is a friggin' mystery. So we're working with what's available. And we see Milton Hershey, born September 13th, 1897, Derry Township, Pennsylvania, and then dies October 13th, 1945 in Hershey. We see Hurricane Milton. It dies October 12th, 2024. Not exactly on the death anniversary, but pretty darn close. And, this is where we're going to go and begin to look even more deeply at Hurricane Milton and that video which was put out on November 2nd, 2023. So this here is a map. This is St. Petersburg. This is Tampa. This is Tampa Bay. And this is Fort DeSoto. Fort DeSoto is right here. And this is what I was talking about in the video. Right here is Siesta Key. Siesta Key, it is said, this is where Hurricane Milton made landfall. I even mentioned in the video from the previous year, the Mounds video, of the legend that the Tampa Bay area is protected, from ancient rites, from the Tampa Bay area is protected from large storms, from, they're called cyclones then, we call them hurricanes now. And sure enough, the storm Milton that came through, like, it certainly caused damage, but it did not cause the sort of damage which all the hype was about during the lead up of Milton before it made landfall. And it certainly did not bring the devastation as we saw in Asheville in western North Carolina. So, I guess you could say that there was, if you want to, there's some degree of protection, but let's keep moving forward. The part of this video series right here, where I began with the River and Stars update, I talked about how the River and Stars ceremony, the aerocirculation ceremony, began at the April 8th solar eclipse, and we did that. We kicked off our River and Stars ceremony on April 8th at Sunbury, Pennsylvania, on the Susquehanna, aligned with that solar eclipse, which was, so hyped up and significant in the spring of this calendar year. And that solar eclipse was predated or it was kicked off by the lunar eclipse, which happened 2 weeks earlier, which corresponded with the collapse of the Key Bridge in Baltimore. Like, we can begin to see all of this weaving together of eclipses and then hurricanes and like cities on water, I suppose. And so I talked about that correspondence in this video here. I just want to begin with this as it relates to Fort DeSoto. These videos I made in the springtime about the eclipses and bridges and the collapse. And, here we have the collapse of the bridge in Baltimore. But something which I didn't bring up in the most recent video, in these videos, because at the time there was no reason to do so, but when the Baltimore Bridge collapsed, it rekindled memories of the Skyway Bridge, of the 1980 Skyway Bridge collapse in Tampa Bay. Here we see a picture of it. This is, I mean, this looks like it's from a friggin' movie, right? This is a picture from, in 1980, there was a in Tampa, there was a bridge collapse, very similar. Look right here. You see this big ship right here, and then this is Baltimore. You got this ship right here, Baltimore, which collapsed this bridge, and then we've got this bridge right here, the Skyway Bridge, which collapsed in 1980. And when the Baltimore Bridge collapsed, they were saying, oh, it reminded us of the Skyway Bridge. And where is the Skyway Bridge? Well, this is the Skyway Bridge. We could see right here. So Fort DeSoto is just like totally in alignment with the Skyway Bridge, like in physical reality. So, you know, we're looking at these parallel stories. All right, let's continue to move on from there. When the Hurricane Milton hit, and when the stories first were coming out, like there was so much hype around Hurricane Milton because everyone was still reeling from trying to wrap their minds around the devastation of Hurricane Helene and the destruction of western North Carolina, when you know, all focus was on Milton. And then when the storm first hit, like, you know, the stories were coming out, and everyone, at least in the United States, at least in the East Coast United States, were very interested in what Hurricane Milton was going to become. Like, I mean, there was a lot of, if you will, like rubbernecking. Everyone wanted to see the damage. And the first story which really came out, the first big story as it related to the destruction of from Milton, was the fact that there was this crane that was in downtown St. Petersburg, and the crane collapsed. So they were building this 42nd, or this, here's a picture of it. Here's the crane that fell down from this building. A crane falls onto a building on First Avenue in St. Petersburg as Hurricane Milton's strong winds tore through the area on October 10th, 2024. And the crane fell from a building which was called the Residences at 400 Central, a 46-story skyscraper being built across from the Times offices. All right. And this is, again, we're dealing with, if you will, like almost like Hollywood scenery from an end of the world movie, or one of those destruction movies that seemed to be very popular, particularly in the 70s and then around 2012, of you know, when storms or what have you, like, destroy the world. This looks like a picture from a Hollywood movie. You know, this looks like a scene from a Hollywood movie. This here has that quality, these larger than life sort of destructions that almost seem surreal. But seemingly they happen. And so this right here, this is a touch point. It's a touch point because this is what was introduced into the collective consciousness. So let's go back to the video which I made right here, which came out the previous year. And I began with that story as it related to the babysitter, and then I corresponded it to burial mounds. And you could see, probably not very clearly, but this is the image I used for the thumbnail for the video, and this is where I took it from. St. Petersburg's Native American Indian mounds, and here's a picture from a postcard, probably dating from the 50s or 60s, and it's of Indian mound at Mound Park Hospital in St. Petersburg. And so this was a touch point. This was a touch point from the video. In fact, it was so much of a touch point that it was the image for the thumbnail. And we could see right here what was then called the Mound Park Hospital is currently known as the Orlando Health Bayfront Hospital. So that's like in the naming structure. And so let's go look at the map. Right here is the residence of 400 Central, and right here is Orlando Health Bayfront Hospital. This very hospital, which the video was about, is very close to where this collapse of the crane took place. And in this general area of St. Petersburg, we also see that there is a Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital, which, you know, if you're familiar with Johns Hopkins is located in Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland being where the bridge collapse happens. So now we've got this, like, you know, this double connection between Baltimore and Tampa with the bridge collapse, and now we have with, you know, Johns Hopkins. You know, take that for what it's worth. Here we can see in another image, here is where the location of the construction of the residences at 400 Central, and then this is where we have, now it's called it's called Bayfront Hospital. It was also the Indian Shell Mound Hospital. It's all right here. So the distance between these two, so this is the location of where the crane fell. This is the hospital. We see that it is 2,400 feet, you know, as the crow flies, if you will. It's 2,000 feet away from each other. And just to put into context, you know, how close they are to the general, you know, if we can look at St. Petersburg, the entire municipality, which is called St. Petersburg, we could see how close these two locations are to each other. The mound site, which was highlighted in the video from 2023, and then the highlight of the Milton event, which happened almost a year later. So we see St. Petersburg is 137 square miles. A mile is equal to 5,280 feet. So this is more or less half a mile away. And let's turn this half mile line into a half mile square, so we can compare this space, this size space, to the overall space of St. Petersburg. So you multiply 0.5 times 0.5, that is the equivalent of, or is a quarter square mile, and getting this into square miles, so we can compare the size location of St. Petersburg in general to this small little section. And so 0.5, actually that should be 0.25, 0.25 square miles divided by 137.6 miles. I already did the math right here, so this number is based upon 0.25 miles, not 0.5 miles. It is, this size makes up 0.001816 of the overall area of St. Petersburg. Or said another way, if there was going to be a, like if we're going to go and look at the accuracy, if this location was called out in a video, which I made a year ago, and then a year later there's this Milton event, and that Milton event is best marked in space. Like a hurricane is difficult to actually say, like, to pinpoint a location, but because the most dramatic effect of what the hurricane was impacted St. Petersburg was this crane. We're going to use this as our epicenter. This is within 99.8184% accuracy of this location. Like, this is the place that was called out, and then the place of where the destruction most dramatically took place, like it was a bullseye, for whatever that may mean. Whatever that may mean. Let's continue down. Let's continue down this line. So then I made another video called 72 Degrees and Sunny, Men in Black in Florida. And this video came out on December 10th, 2023. Let's go back to this list right here. So this video here came out on November 2nd. I put this video out, and this video out, and this video out, and this video out, and then this right here, December 10th one. That's the 72 degrees sunny in Florida. And the purpose of this video was, it was almost a conclusion of a 6-week adventure. No, it was longer than 6 weeks. It was all of October, all of November, and then half of December. So that would be a 10-week adventure in Florida, nomadic house sitting. And this was my summary video. And in that video, I talked about, to me, in that 10-week period, what were the key events? What were like the standouts or the highlights of my experience? And I mentioned one was that meeting in Fort DeSoto, and then the second one was where I went in Florida on the East Coast. So I went all the way. We started the trip on the west coast of Florida, and then we continued it on the east coast of Florida. And on my birthday, which was December 2nd, we went to this place called Blind Creek Beach. This is what this video is about. And it was a nude beach, and I like going to nude beaches. And this video had, or at least this portion of the video, the 72 degrees and sunny video, this portion of the video was kind of fun, like it was done like kind of funny. You know, I was talking about going to nude beach. It's kind of silly, but it was a really memorable part of my experience. And what I did in this 72 degrees and sunny video was I just made a correlation. I made a correlation between Fort DeSoto, this is where that was, and then this right here of where this Blind Creek Beach was on on the eastern shore of Florida. And then I went in the video and I just showed the line. This is where it was exactly on the video of where the nude beach was, and then this is Fort DeSoto. All right. And I also highlighted in that video is like the exact midpoint was this place called Sebring. You can go and rewatch this video if you want. Like all the receipts are there. I just talked about Sebring and how it was exactly in the middle. It just so happened to go right over Sebring. This line right here. And this isn't just like randomly. Sebring isn't here or here, but it was in the exact middle of that line. And then I talked about Sebring and this car right here. I mean, watch the video. So, all right, let's go back to Hurricane Milton. So I mentioned one of the stories that first came out as Milton went across Florida. And the first story that went out the first big story was the collapse of the crane in St. Petersburg. And we just talked about it. And then the second one was about all of these tornadoes that were experienced throughout Florida, but primarily on the east coast of Florida. And then of the hurricanes, there were 4 fatalities. You know, Hurricane Milton leaves 4 dead. This is when it first came out. Before, I think there were more, the death toll was higher, but this was the story that was getting the most amount of attention, that there were hurricanes on eastern Florida, and this tornadoes on the eastern Florida, which were a byproduct. The tornadoes were a byproduct of the hurricane, and they led to these fatalities in St. Lucie County. All right. So let's go and look right here. So, this is the same article we looked at before, and it's talking about Hurricane Milton plowed into the Atlantic Ocean on Thursday after cutting a destructive path across Florida. And then on the third paragraph down, it says, so I'm kind of reading this and trying to talk simultaneously. So after cutting a destructive path across Florida that spawned more than a dozen tornadoes and destroyed homes and killed at least 4 people, and now it goes into the 4 people down here in the third paragraph. The 4 deaths occurred in St. Lucie on Florida's east coast, with at least 2 of those in the Spanish Lake communities, a set of retirement homes. When multiple twisters touched down. So now we've got another point of reference, like a very, very pinpointed point of reference. We had the crane as a point of reference, and now we have this Spanish Lake communities. So let's go look right here. So this is where the Spanish Lake Country Club is, and this is where Blind Creek Beach is. So this is Blind Creek Beach, which I made reference to in the 72 degrees and sunny video, and this is where the second story, or the second primary story, which talks about the Milton destruction, takes place. Now these two aren't nearly as close as the Mound Crane connection. They are 15 miles apart, but still, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I would say that's a pretty big connection. And we'll go look at this right here. Here's the screenshot, you know, from the video I made. I made this video, and, you know, I showed the line. This endpoint and this endpoint are exactly on the, you know, this is the Blind Creek Beach, is the eastern endpoint. This is Fort DeSoto on the western endpoint, and it makes this line which goes right over Sebring. And then when we overlap, this is where the, I mean, actually this should be right here. I have this red star at Siesta Key, where the hurricane actually is said to first enter the Florida coast. Hold on for a second. Let me do this. In actuality, it should be from here to here. Those are the lines. So this is from Siesta Key, where the hurricane first entered Florida, and then this is where the deaths are at the Spanish Lake retirement community. But in actuality, it should be from this point to that point. And we could see the line is almost exactly the same. It's almost exactly the same. So the point I'm trying to make right here, and this, as I said, this just corresponds or builds upon what was first mentioned between the River and Star ceremony and Asheville and hurricanes, and like the Hurricane Helene and the 1896 Cedar Keys hurricane. Like, we're seeing another correspondence, like a really, really big correspondence, showing itself a second time. Right here articles also after the hurricane, specifically talking about Sebring, Florida. The mayor details early damage assessments. Sebring, Florida was right in the middle of Hurricane Milton's path. This was me highlighting Sebring right here in the video. Let's go look at this now. This is the actual said path of Hurricane Milton. This is from the National Hurricane Center. In their map, they show this red line as the path of the actual hurricane. The points which they call out are St. Petersburg. This spot right here in St. Petersburg really seems to overlap with this spot right here, which is located, this is Fort DeSoto. This is where the crane collapses, right here on the eastern side of the St. Petersburg Peninsula. And we could see they highlighted this. Here they point out the deaths in St. Lucie, just like we pointed out the deaths in St. Lucie. We could see that the hurricane made landfall near Siesta Key, all the same points. But if you follow the actual path in which they say, and if I were to guess, like I don't know this for certain, but my assumption is that this path is probably the path of the eye of the hurricane. And we can see right here, this is the hurricane. The eye would be right here. The most destructive elements of it seem to be on this leading edge of the hurricane. But the eye of the hurricane goes right over this part of Florida. This is where all of the tornado destructions were, probably influenced by this part of the storm. You know, I'm going by just storm narrative, whether it was something more than a storm, whether it was a storm that was created, whether it was a storm that wasn't just created but driven. You know, that's another conversation, but we're going to work on just like the baseline level right now. Like, you know, this is a naturally forming storm, which I don't necessarily think that's the case, but it's the least controversial because we're dealing with enough controversial topics right now. Let's ground into something which is at least, you know, not as controversial. So anyway, going back to this. This is the path of the eye, and it goes right over this part of Florida. This part of Florida. This is where this line goes. It's like, whether it was steered here, or whether it was designed to go here, or whether, you know, it just happened naturally that it went here. I don't know. But what is this place? Well, that is this. You can see this shape is this shape. And what is this? This is Kennedy Space Center, and this right here is the headquarters. Maybe it's not the headquarters. It is a major location of the Space Force Station. This is where all of the rockets take place. Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is Cape Canaveral right here. This is Cape Canaveral. This is the Kennedy Space Center. And sure enough, this is what the storm went over. Particularly interesting when you go back to the Helene videos, the third one, where we looked at Asheville as the headquarters, maybe not the headquarters, but the archival location for the NCEI, or the archival data of all climate information, which is used for worldwide climate control management. You know, and now we have this location, which is very, very key into the reality of, you know, let's just call it Space Force or climate or weaponizing the weather. Like, you know, the Space Force Station is a military operation. This falls underneath the Department of Defense, and so we see that comes into play a second time here. Now, interestingly, from what I gathered, Cape Canaveral received minimal damage. Like, there was some damage there, but there wasn't anything major going on, or no major catastrophic damage. And maybe that's because the eye went over it, as opposed to, you know, getting this part of the storm going over it. That's what hit St. Lucie so hard. The more southern parts of the eye seem to have taken the brunt of the damage. So that's what we got right here. So where do we want to wrap this up? So what are possible explanations of what I just described? And I'm going to say this is grounding the consciousness, because we're dealing with a lot of, admittedly, we're dealing with a lot of like, out there concepts. And I'm not necessarily concluding any of them. I'm just saying like these are objective, observable data points, and how they're linked, who knows? One possibility, maybe all of this is coincidence. Maybe all of this is a friggin' coincidence. The Helene stuff, the Susquehanna stuff, the video I made a year earlier with Hershey and Milton, maybe all that's just coincidence. Maybe it's all coincidence. It's certainly possible. Maybe this has something to do with like multiple timeline awareness. Maybe for some reason I'm tapped in on a multiple timeline awareness, that there's a part of my subconscious which I don't think that I'm delving into two different timelines, but there certainly seems to be multiple. That's a theme that shows up as an idea. Maybe that we're dealing with that. Maybe through this timeline awareness, there's some degree of creating and influencing the unfolding of reality. Maybe. I'm not saying that, but I'm certainly saying, look at these events. Here's the most controversial one. If you followed a lot of my work, you know that one of the themes that continues to come up is like, me and Project Stargate and the NSA in my childhood. Am I an unconscious Project Stargate asset guiding in things from another dimension? I'm not saying that's the case. But if I wanted to write a Hollywood movie, this would certainly fit that narrative. Or maybe this is something else entirely. And at the end of the day, that, the willingness to explore the potentialities of what reality is, and being very, very conscious of reality, of the actual events, and not the subjective events, but like more of the objective events, because we're going to lean into the weirdness of reality. But then to meet it with curiosity, and to meet it with curiosity, and maybe like a little bit of fun, a little bit of reverence, like all of these different things. Like that's what this is about. That's what all of these Susquehanna alchemy videos are. And even the river and stars ceremony, it is living at the bleeding edge of what is the nature of reality, and what is our role with it, and not as an intellectual pursuit, but an active experimentation. So I'm going to wrap it up this way. The last video I made had to do with the last video which I released had to do with a coming alignment between false time calendar system and real-time lunar phases. And I dropped in at the end of that video that I'm going to be putting out, I'm going to be doing an online course called Grounding Consciousness. And the whole idea of that course of Grounding Consciousness is to bring into the objective awareness of people, like the techniques of how you become grounded in objective reality. Not saying that there isn't more than objective reality, but becoming as grounded in objective reality as possible, so that you can begin to one, live outside, at least in consciousness, ground outside in consciousness, from paradigm reality, but then also to deal with a lot of the weirdness of reality in a way that you don't get swept up in it, because that is certainly a possibility. There are countless tales of people recognizing this relationship they have between their inner world and the outer world's unfoldment. And that is a perilous line to cross if it's not done with care. So that being said, since talking about that course, I put a little bit more form into it. So let me go into that. So the class is called Grounding Consciousness. Grounding Consciousness is actually a 4-level program aimed at connecting consciousness with natural time to explore the mystery of life. And I'm beginning the first class, which I'm going to offer, is level 1. Levels 2, 3, and 4, they're not, those are not available yet. And these are going to be 5 90-minute online courses, and these 5 classes are going to be aligned with the phases of the moon, and they're held live. They'll also be recorded in the event that you can't make it, but they're held live so that there can be actual interactions. And what we'll be covering is the relationship between inner world and outer world, subjective reality and false societal reality. And then we're going to begin to understand celestial movements as real time, astrological charts as maps of physical reality, not concepts for interpretations. We're going to be looking at astrological concepts, which, if you know what they are, and you don't have to know astrology to take this course, but how they actually tie into physical reality so you can understand these concepts but ground them in physical reality. We'll look at the connections between astrology, mythology, and cultural control systems. This explains really why astrology is both really important, but then also all of its traps. We'll deconstruct the zodiac. We'll look at the contradictions between the different systems. And then you'll learn how to use an ephemeris and the basics of chart comparison. This program combines astronomy and astrology. This combination is known as astromonia, and it's going to help participants merge with the mystery of life and not interpret charts. This is not an astrology course. This is, if anything, an astromonia course. The program is a foundation for an authentic life experience designed to complement other philosophies and approaches. And so this is when the classes are. They're going to correspond with this period of time, which is when the, what I call the false time calendar and the real-time lunar phases are in alignment. The 1st, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 30th of December, all held at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And so the class is going to be limited to 20 participants. The admission fee for the class is, I have an early bird special, $300 if you sign up before November 1st. So that's like 8 days from the recording of this video. And that's $350 afterwards. This is how you would pay, PayPal, Venmo. If you want to do just credit cards, I've got these QR code sort of stuff. So if you're interested, you could send me an email and I can send you that PDF file, which I just went through right now, which shows you how to sign up. Or if you have any more questions, you could just email me. I have 5 people who've already signed up, so there are 15 spots available. Really love to fill this up before the 1st, because I got some expenses I need to cover, and so this is, the way which I make my way through material reality. Anyway, my friends, that's today's video. I hope that it was thought-provoking, and until the next one. This is mkwann, and I am checking out.